May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be pleasing in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. Amen. Please be seated. My worship professor at Luther Seminary says that you get 4 times during your ministry to make a sermon about you, so I'm using one of them this morning. I want to thank all of you for all of the support and the love and the prayers that you have provided for me during 5 fairly long years of formation. I am deeply, deeply grateful as you've supported me through this time of transition and growth and change. And I am so grateful to be here with you today. I love being here. I love all of you. And I love being able to be in ministry with and for all of you. Thank you. My spirit never walked beyond our counting house. Mark me. In life, my spirit never roved beyond the narrow limits of our money-changing world, and weary journeys lie before me. That's a snippet of the conversation between Jacob Marley's ghost and Scrooge in A Christmas Carol. I've often thought Dickens must have had today's gospel reading somewhere in his mind as he wrote the story. In this moment, Marley expresses his horror at the blindness and the lack of compassion his boundaries have helped to create. And so today I want us to be thinking about boundaries and blindness. Now, I need to make one thing crystal clear. My message this morning is not that boundaries are bad. Healthy boundaries are, in fact, vital for our own safety and welfare. Boundaries are a tool like power or wealth that we can use for good, for ill. Jesus' criticism of tools like boundaries and power and wealth focuses on how we misuse them. To exclude others, for example, or push them out, or grind them down. It's never the tool that's the problem. It's the person using it. Jesus leads off the parable of the rich man by painting a picture of 2 earthly worlds with strict boundaries. In the world of the haves, the rich man lacks for nothing. In fact, at a time when around 30% of people were unable to afford even the bare necessities of life, the rich man's love for food and fine things is simply beyond belief. And we compare that to Lazarus. Have not. A starving man who can't even set his sights high enough to long for the leftovers from the rich man's table. He'd be happy to just go dumpster diving. A sick man whose healing process is forever stalled because the bacteria in the dog's saliva continually reinfects his oozing sores when they lick him. Now, interestingly, Jesus doesn't portray the rich man as evil. The rich man isn't addressing Lazarus. Well, he's certainly read the Old Testament's teachings about care for the poor and its warnings about greed, Moses and the prophets, so he knows the right thing to do. This is just garden variety benign neglect. It's not only the gate at the front of the house that's keeping them apart. It's the strict boundaries of wealth and health and social status and the importance that the rich man gives to them. And these boundaries are blinding the rich man to those outside of the world his own, just as they blinded Marley. Then we move along in the parable, and all of a sudden both men die. And their situations drastically change. The rich man suffers while Lazarus is the one carried off to paradise. And yet somehow this radical change hasn't cured the rich man's blindness. He still imagines that the earthly rules apply. He wants the beggar to serve the rich man. And so he asks Abraham to send Lazarus with the water he so desperately needs. But after being told no, he tries to persuade Abraham to make Lazarus his messenger boy instead, with a warning for his brothers. The rich man in this parable never speaks directly to Lazarus. Never apologizes for his benign neglect. Even in death, the rich man doesn't see Lazarus as a person. This is another thing for him to use, a person to order around. And it makes me wonder, as I reflect on this, whether it's really the uncrossable chasm that separates them. Whether it's the rich man's attitude that creates the boundaries. An attitude he appears to keep even in death. Many of us who hear this parable will want to put ourselves in the shoes of the rich man, or maybe Lazarus. But this morning we need to put ourselves in the place of the 5 brothers. Because like them, we too are faced with a choice. Like their brother, the rich man, we can maintain the boundaries we've carefully constructed through our lives as barriers. Not the boundaries that keep us safe or healthy, but the ones that blind us to the strangers we share the world with. People who aren't like us, who make us uncomfortable, who we'd rather not share space with, who we think someone else should care for. People we overlook without thinking twice. I'm sure somebody has come to mind. Or we can be like 2 other people in Luke's gospel that we find later on. They come across a stranger as they walk along the road to Emmaus after a long week in Jerusalem. They invite this unknown man across the boundary and into their midst. They listen to him as he provides new perspective about what Moses and the prophets said about their rabbi who had just been executed. And then when they stopped, the 2 men insisted the stranger cross the boundary and invite them in for a meal. And as they shared their bread with this stranger, all of a sudden, they recognized him as their Lord. The good news is that our God is a boundary-breaking God. We see this everywhere, freeing the Israelites from bondage, speaking to us through the prophets. In the ministry of Jesus to those on the outside, and in Jesus' death and resurrection, God has broken the ultimate boundary, the one between death and life. This morning, Jesus is calling us to follow God's example, to cross the boundaries we use to push others out or grind them down. Calling us to change our attitudes and overcome our blindness, to see those on the outside, the excluded, the marginalized. But when we do that, we won't find King Jesus. We won't find the Jewish rabbi who wandered Galilee. We find Jesus who is Jesus, poor and crucified. Jesus, the risen Lord. When we do this, we'll find